Deep in the trenches of Spool Swamp, behind a water dam, hides the third essence of nature. However, in order to get to it, Link will need to make friends with some animal companions, go on a date with a Subrosian, and eventually make his way back to the buried Temple of Seasons in order to harness the power of summer. In summer, creeks dry up and vines grow tall, which will allow us to climb our way into the next dungeon. Welcome to Poison Moth's Lair, a conceptually very interesting dungeon. But first, I have to get something of a bold claim out of the way. Remember when I said that there was only one piece of dungeon music that I'd rank as worse than Snake's Remains? That would be this track. This is genuinely my least favorite piece of dungeon music, period. Not just in this game, but in the entire dang series. I see what they're going for with the two alternating curious and danger sections of the song, but something about it is genuinely so grating. I can only describe it as repetitive, plodding bloop sounds. I dislike it so much that I decided to put it at the top of the script here just to get it out of the way and not subject my future editing self to this track longer than is necessary. Thanks. There's some genuinely great stuff in this game's soundtrack, but this is not it. The good news is that we can only go up from here, and up we will go, I can assure you. Visually speaking, the dungeon gets by okay. I think the color palette works pretty well. I like the blue stone walls, and I don't think the beige floor clashes here in any negative way. It's fairly neutral, though it is pretty visually similar to Bottle Grotto from Link's Awakening DX. Right down to recycling the flagstone floor texture, but all a bit brighter here than that dungeon. At first, I thought this was the old wafer cookie walls making a return, but it is actually a slightly different wall texture, one that I don't think was borrowed from Link's Awakening at all, as far as I can tell at least. Still, the dungeon does add little bits of visual flair, paired with interesting and diverse room layouts, in order to keep important things memorable and engaging for the player, and it does so to great effect, whether it be by highlighting important spots with these purple floor tiles, or going all out decorating this hallway with tons of torches to convey its significance, since that's where the boss door is, or just by using interesting room layouts filled with obstacles that will stick out in the player's heads. There's no sameness in this dungeon's floor plan. Every room is unique. This is also Season's first dungeon to have a second floor, which helps to make things feel larger and more sprawling than they actually are. The dungeon is made up of the equivalent of 28 or 32 standard-sized rooms. That's 15 on the first floor, 13 on the second floor, and 4 to make up the side-scrolling passageways. Not a massive increase over the last dungeon, but I don't think that bigger for the sake of bigger would have been the best choice. It's more important that the dungeon does interesting things. The overall layout appears vaguely moth-shaped on the first floor, but not at all on the second, forming almost a rectangle. And I'm glad they didn't try to constrain themselves too much to the dungeon shape here. But there are a few moments where things start feeling a little bit disjointed with the layout, particularly when you need to reach the northernmost rooms on either floor. These are disconnected entirely on the map, and only reachable through those aforementioned side-scrolling sections. But they do keep that navigational aspect fairly linear when those come into play, so I feel it's handled as well as one could ask for in these cases at least. If I had to nail down a singular guiding design principle for this dungeon, I would say that more than anything, Poison Moth's Lair is a big test of your spatial awareness, or at the very least a lesson to the player that spatial awareness is something they need to be keenly aware of when dungeon crawling going forward. It does so by employing what I've often referred to as the treasure chest tease. I don't know if there's actually an official name for this concept, but I named it so for the way Zelda games, especially the top-down titles, will often allow you to see a treasure chest before you're able to actually reach it, teasing you. This idea can be used to motivate you to explore, give you a navigational objective to chase after, or even serve as a landmark. And most effectively perhaps, it makes the payoff of opening the chest and getting what is inside of it feel more satisfying than it would be if you just stumbled blindly upon it. It's that anticipation. It builds excitement to see treasure just out of reach. This dungeon uses this concept incredibly well, and it uses it for more than just treasure chests. There is still some of that, of course, but in addition to treasure chests, sometimes you'll see platforms, new paths to explore, obstacles, or even these trampolines, all designed to get you to constantly keep the entirety of the dungeon layout in mind, as well as piquing your curiosity. Right off of the first room, we can spot the chest with the boss key up on this ledge. In the next room, we can see an entire area we can't reach due to this chasm. In the next room, another out-of-reach area which actually leads to the end of the dungeon, no less. In this hallway, there's a double tease, another treasure chest on a ledge, albeit an optional one, as well as this staircase beyond this chasm. They tease us with this hallway a bit farther down, which we can't cross yet due to the collapsing floor. They tease us by showing us all these ledges and walkways that we can't reach yet, and making us walk past the boss door in this all-important looking hallway. You get the idea. Constantly, the level designers are showing us things to come, giving us little things that we need to file away and revisit later. And I love that sort of thing. It imparts upon the player a greater sense of the dungeon being one larger, interconnected structure that we have to crisscross through, even if in reality these two areas may be entirely separated from a gameplay standpoint. Another very important way that this dungeon leans into that spatial awareness idea is in the way it uses its verticality. The second floor isn't here for no reason. Going back and forth between the two floors is vital for progression. Often we are required to either drop down from the floor above to a specific spot below, or do the inverse of that by using these trampolines to bounce up to the floor above. This is a really fun way to navigate. You'll see the spot that you need to reach, such as this ledge with the staircase in this water room, or this blocked off section of this second floor room, and either jump down the appropriate pit or move the trampoline into position in order to jump back up to the right spot. Verticality in 3D Zelda is surprisingly easier and more natural to incorporate, but the 2D games have really only played with this idea a handful of times before this. The Tower of Hera in A Link to the Past, and Link's Awakening's Eagle's Tower being prime examples of this. And while I thought these were well-designed dungeons, even in these cases we were only able to use that verticality in a navigational sense in one direction, jumping down to the floor below, not back up. This is something I admire a great deal about the Oracle titles, however. The way they iterate on these tried and true Zelda concepts and take them to their logical extremes. Why not have a way to launch ourselves back up? And why not build puzzles around doing so? And so they did. And it works great. So in short, Poison Moth's Lair tests the player's spatial awareness by asking them to keep track of how these two floors and your position within them relate to each other, and how you can use that information to navigate this space successfully. And it is brilliantly done. Also, trampolines are just fun, plain and simple. Of course, before you can use one of these trampolines, you'll need to track down the dungeon item, the Rock's Feather. It's located in this northwestern room on the second floor. You may recall, if you've seen my Link's Awakening coverage, that I adore this item. It's always fun to gain new abilities related to mobility. In short, it lets you jump, which in turn will allow us to cross over gaps in the floor, jump onto those trampolines, and even avoid some obstacles and traps, like these giant blade traps or spikes in the floor. The most clever use for it, perhaps, is to jump over the switch on the floor of this hallway, which is such a clever little item gate. Usually in these games you want to press the button, not avoid it. This also also takes us to the dungeon's mid-boss. These guys are called Omwai. Omwai, though apparently some sources refer to them as Calamar Eye, which is a pretty fun name, but Zelda Encyclopedia calls them Omwai, so that's what I'm going with, even if I am sort of winging it with the pronunciation here. These guys are kind of a neat mid-boss, but I do think that there is something of a cryptic element to fighting them. What you're supposed to do is use the power bracelet to yank them out of their little pools, then toss them to the ground and go wild with your sword. That said, they're not the most intuitively designed enemies. I don't exactly recall my first time fighting them and how I figured this out, but I did go back and check the VOD from when I streamed this game back in the summer of 2024, and even then I basically had to work my way through Link's entire inventory trying items out on them. Once you know how to fight them, they shouldn't present too much of a challenge, but figuring out what to actually do is kind of the hard part. There is an owl statue with a hint for this, which says, "In water, it is invincible," which is probably enough of a clue to land on this method that you need to remove them from their pools of water. My only issue with this is that the statue is placed on this ledge, which would be pretty easy to miss before actually heading into that mid-boss chamber. I should stress, I don't think that this is a huge deal, but I did think it was still worth pointing out. With all of that said, once we've combed through both floors and found the correct spot to drop down to in order to grab the boss key, we can cross over this section of the upper floor and confront the dungeon boss. Waiting to ambush us is this game's version of Mothula. So unlike the last two bosses, Mothula is not a boss reworked from Zelda 1, having originated instead from A Link to the Past, appearing as the boss of Skull Woods. They look pretty good here too. I wouldn't necessarily call it an improvement over the SNES version, but it could only translate over so well to a Game Boy Color sprite. Still, Mothula's design does have some tweaks, like having only a singular but much larger eyeball, and having a slightly less busy look overall. It actually feels like a really logical progression of the design evolution when considering that this game came out after A Link to the Past, but before Wind Waker. Speaking of design evolutions, you may recall from A Link to the Past that Mothula itself wasn't actually too challenging, especially for how well Link was equipped by that point in the game. The challenge instead was found in the frankly chaotic arena, which was extremely hazardous, surrounding Link with blade traps set atop a shifting floor. I'm not sure if it's due to technical limitations, maybe the Game Boy Color wouldn't have been able to handle so many moving parts, or if it was for another reason. Maybe they wanted to align it with this dungeon's design philosophy more, but regardless, Mothula has been heavily reworked here, and if you ask me, this change was for the better. Rather than relying on the obstacles of the arena, Mothula actually behaves aggressively here. It fights by launching projectiles either directly at you or in a circular wave around itself, deploying a handful of minions and zooming around the arena at high speeds. Not to say that the boss of Skull Woods was passive per se, but Mothula itself feels far more involved in the fight this time around. Of course, the arena does still play a part in the challenge. There's a figure-8 shaped pit in the center of the room, which Link can be knocked down and into the room below, keeping in theme with the rest of the dungeon. Reminiscent of previous Moldorm appearances, the fight will need to be restarted if you are pushed out of the ring, though at least it's a lot snappier to get back upstairs thanks to the trampoline down here, allowing you to get back into the fight much quicker. I have no doubt that a lot of people find this to be a frustrating element to the battle, but I actually really like this mechanic, as annoying as it may seem. Other bosses penalize you with damage, and that's fine. But battling Mothula here is just as much about taking them down as it is staying in the fight yourself, and that adds some much needed stakes to the battle. Mothula doesn't exactly have a huge health pool, and can be defeated really quickly otherwise, so the added tension here goes a long way to making the fight more memorable. So overall, not too hard of a boss fight, so long as your reflexes are quick and you're feeling tenacious. Just keep on it, and Mothula will go down. Once they're defeated, we can head down these stairs to another section of the room below, where we'll find the bright sun, the third essence of nature. So overall, despite containing some pretty awful music, I think Poison Moth's Lair is a really well-designed dungeon, and it's the first dungeon in the game to really give me pause and get me to really check my map. Plus, after the way the last two dungeons felt like reworked Zelda 1 dungeons, albeit with pretty significant overhauls, this one feels so fresh and original in a way that is only to its benefit. A lot of the navigation is reasonably streamlined, especially during the first half of the dungeon, but you can feel the well-tuned difficulty curve escalating the challenge here nicely, as you need to keep the overall layout in mind, and how your position allows access to other parts of the dungeon, namely moving between the two floors. The dungeon starts with you exploring nearly the entire structure, going through most of the first floor, upstairs, and then all the way to the opposite end of the second floor, in order to tease you with everything and allow you to gain the lay of the land before rewarding you with the dungeon item, which pretty much just unlocks the rest of the dungeon, setting you loose, letting you gather everything you couldn't before. The item gates here are well thought out, with gaps to jump over, moving platforms, and even these little overhead walkways that you need to leap across above other explorable spaces. All of this keeps the design within that theme of spatial awareness, and is explored both on an individual room basis as well as within the larger structure as a whole. I appreciate that the game held off on implementing multiple floors in the dungeon layouts until a point where incorporating another floor would actually be a benefit to the design. It's thoughtful and purposeful in a way that I can't help but appreciate. Continuing from Snake's Remains, we also have some really good item integration. There's use cases for bombs, the power bracelet, the Rock's Feather of course, and even your shield, which is often neglected in these Game Boy titles. It's always a little disappointing to me when a Zelda game gives you a really cool item and then forgets to do anything with it after the dungeon it's found in, but they took the time to keep these previous items relevant and useful, and the Rock's Feather especially is going to be vital going forward, until it gets replaced, that is. Also, I wasn't sure where to include this in the script, but this statue pushing puzzle is neat. You're only matching the pattern of these statues with those on the other side of the room, but even this little puzzle requires a degree of spatial awareness, since you need to have room to actually push the statues, and they must be pushed, not pulled. It's a relatively simple puzzle, but a neat one. Like, I actually have to think about it for a second, instead of just immediately shoving something into place. It's a lot more interesting than any of the previous two dungeons' little push block puzzles. So yeah, overall, I think Poison Moth's Lair would be an easy dungeon to overlook. There's no plot significance to be had here, aside from the usual dungeon MacGuffin. There's not a ton to visually set it apart, and the music is pretty bad. But beneath all that superficial stuff is an expertly crafted dungeon that makes you have to consider how you move about within the space it gives you. It's not a perfect dungeon. I do wish they had found a better way to bridge these northern rooms and the rest of the dungeon personally. It feels like a bit of a disjointed little detour when you get into it, isolated from the rest of the structure. But maybe that only feels as jarring to me as it does because of how perfectly interconnected and cohesive the rest of the dungeon feels as one larger structure, rather than just a bunch of rooms slapped together haphazardly. So it may not be without a few blemishes, but those don't come anywhere close to overshadowing just how good everything else here is. Thank you so much for watching. Special thanks goes out to my channel members here on YouTube, as well as my supporters on Patreon, the names of which you're seeing on screen right now. You all are awesome. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye-bye.